All right, let's get going. That was really great stuff for the people that were in here for the pitch count presentation that Dirk just gave. Really, really powerful, impactful stuff. And from kind of where we're coming from and what we see at the high school level on a year-to-year basis, that's probably one of the most easily predicted things in terms of if a guy's going to get hurt or not is what kind of pitch counts these guys are running up in high school games and travel ball games, and how best to monitor those things. And I know from my standpoint as a coach, how powerful it is if somebody is monitoring those and actually tracking data, for those things to give the players and the coaches an idea of what's happening to them from a throwing standpoint. We're not doing a great enough job of it, at the high school level, and what we have to see in travel ball, it's not being monitored as well as it should be. And apps like that, initiatives like that, that Pitch Smart, other things that are out there now are hopefully going to change the game in a positive way for the players. I'm going to talk a little bit about bridging the gap. This is a presentation on also, developing pelvic and trunk velocity, but it's not really about that. It's more about what do we do with our time in between? What do we do with the time that's spent between when fall ball ends and when when your pitchers need to start building up again? What are some safe, practical ways to still train your pitchers and also get them off the mound, work on some skill development? So these are some things that we actually decided we're sick of seeing how much we were going to train. Is it too much? Is it too little? When do we stop having them throw? When do we stop, shut them down? What to train? How much of it to train? It all came from a lot of questions I've always had as a coach. I actually got with two doctors, Brian Waterman and Michael Freehill. Michael Freehill is now a head of up there in orthopedics at the University of Michigan, and Brian Waterman is the head of orthopedics at Wake Forest University, where I used to coach. These two guys kind of opened my eyes to what's going on with the arm, when it needs to be shut down, how long it needs to be shut down for, and help us put in a bunch of protocols for our guys to be able to train safely throughout, a 12-month period, because that's basically what we're doing is, we're not having them throw all year, but they're certainly training all year, and what are the safest ways to do that? It starts with how long do you shut a guy down for? All of that usually is based on skill development, skill acquisition, what they need to accomplish, where they are currently in their development cycle. But a general rule of thumb that I've always operated on is between 6 and 8 weeks of no throwing at all, not touching a baseball, nothing. So general question comes up is, now what do I do with all of that time? Do I just have them do PFP and not throw? Certainly we do some things like that. Do I have them just lift? Do I have them just conditioning? What in the world do we do with this time? So it kind of led me to this question is, how do I maximize it? So here's what we did about it. We built a motion capture lab at Wake Forest, the school that I was coaching at before I came to Arkansas. So that is a picture of about 3/4 of the mocap lab. It's 16 infrared cameras. It's force plates in the mound, indoor TrackMan, Rapsodo. All of those things are inside of a long pitching tunnel where there's one mound, one plate, and we can do hardcore motion capture in that lab. So we built this for a bunch of different reasons, impacting general health of our pitchers and pitchers that are, coming up through the system. There's a lot of really good reasons for us to do this, but it was mainly based out of curiosity and trying to push the envelope on pitching development. So we built this lab, which I'm incredibly proud of, and it took 4 years to build. It's one of the highlights of my coaching career, and I hope that someday we get to, do that again. So at the end of the fall, we threw exit bullpens, which we've always done as long as I've been coaching, throw an exit bullpen, get some numbers, find out where they're at with 12 of our pitchers, and we motion captured them. We evaluated for 3 things. We're looking at 3 things. Pelvic and trunk velocity being 1 and 2, and then horizontal shoulder abduction how much within what ranges, and I'll go over that in a little bit. 4 of them fell within range in all 3 of those categories. So there's a markered system that the players all wear. I'll show you some pictures of that in a second. The ranges we got from Motion Analysis, which is the company that sold us the cameras, they're based on 90 college pitchers and 35 pros that have all been motion captured and all had these parameters in terms of performance, overall health. There's many different things that were tested to determine the parameters for what we were looking at. 4 of our guys fell completely out of range on all 4 things. So a good 33% of the pitchers we tested fell completely out of range. 2 had enough trunk velocity, but fell out of range on the other 2. 1 had significant pelvic velocity, but had poor trunk velocity and not enough shoulder horizontal abduction, and 1 just had enough horizontal shoulder abduction to fall within a normal range. So that's a big number. When 4 of your pitchers aren't achieving what you want from a delivery standpoint for performance and health, that's a fairly large number. Man, we didn't test everybody. We had 4 or 5 guys that did not throw based on various injuries, inning counts, weren't throwing, a bunch of different reasons. But when you see numbers like this, like when you see a number that says 30% of my pitching staff is not even close to where they need to be, and then another 4 guys are also not close to where they need to be, this is an alarming thing. So what are we going to do about that? These are just the raw numbers for what happened in the motion capture lab. So 510 to 740 degrees per second of pelvic rotational velocity, 935 to 1165 degrees per second of trunk rotation velocity are what we were looking for. Again, the horizontal shoulder abduction ranges turned out to be not as important as what we were looking for with the other 2. I think the lumbo-pelvic velocity, that region, and finding a way to maximize it was the game-changing thing in what we studied. Here's a pie graph of our MoCap results. Again, the no pass being a humongous chunk of our pie, and also you've got 4 other pitchers, so basically 2/3 of our pitching staff are insufficient in the range that we were looking for. This is what it looked like. So 16 cameras, that's our pitcher markered. He's going to go ahead and throw his entire bullpen markered in with motion capture. This is the video of what it looked like. It's a slow-mo video. You've got all the angular velocities down below. And again, what we were looking for is segment velocity. Like, we didn't really care as much about what the angular velocities were. I mean, they're certainly important, but segment velocities is what we were looking at. So we could identify trunk, pelvic, how that has an effect on how his shoulder moves into abduction, and also what it means in terms of thrown ball velocity, which I'll get into in a second. So taking all of this information and then set out and create a plan based on what can we do with a guy when he's not going to throw a baseball. So what we did was we took 4 med ball drills for each one of our guys and prescribed the drills, dosed them out, and with the idea being that if we can improve the lower body strength, ballistic power, then we'd improve the entire throwing chain. And it was about, I think it was a total of 5 weeks of training, a retest in the motion capture lab with throwing those medicine balls to determine whether or not we were actually making a dent. Instead of just saying, hey, we like medicine balls, we think it's a good idea, we're actually going to put them back in the lab and retest it. So 4 weeks, 5 weeks into their shutdown, we remarkered our pitchers, all 12 of the guys that were initially tested, and tried to find out what are we going to do with whether or not what we did worked. We then, kind of in the middle of this, I ended up taking a job at Arkansas. So it kind of throws our study for a little bit of a loop, but we're able to still complete it. So while at Arkansas, we take the same shutdown period, run our guys off the mound throwing at all 4 of our drills, and then measure med ball shot put, which I'm going to get into in a second and why it's important. Med ball shot put from the mound to max velocity with the medicine ball, paired it with max velocity from their fall pitching data, and had a strong correlation between distances between 27 and 30 feet and peak maximal velocities above 90 miles an hour. So guys that could produce those kind of numbers would then also produce thrown ball velocities that we were looking for that were in range. In fact, Isaiah Campbell, a guy that we think is going to be a super dude for us and start on Fridays, was about 30 miles an hour with a medicine ball off the mound. 96 miles an hour is kind of where his correlation fell, 93 to 96 or 93 to 97. Another, 27 or above, Jacob Koski-Schock, a 29.6 maximal velocity with a med ball shot put off the mound, correlated to a 94 mile an hour fastball. And again, this was all of the guys that we tested at Arkansas that we did see a strong correlation between ball velocity from a medicine ball and thrown ball velocity. So these are some of the drills we had all of the guys do. This was at Wake and also at Arkansas. We had all these guys do these things. So this is a step behind shot put. So what we're trying to do with the step behind shot put is gain momentum into our target, square off our back foot, and drill the medicine ball into a wall. You can do it into a fence, anything that you think will block the speed of what you're doing. The reason for this drill, the reason for us wanting to do this, is to gain momentum into our throw and also to square off their backside so that when they go into plant, they can fire their hip, rotate their pelvis, and spin their trunk. One of the other reasons why we decided to go with shot puts, again, we tested some other things that I'll get into in a second, but why shot puts were one of the things that we thought would be the best thing for us to test was if you're holding an implement, striding behind, it's going to hold your shoulders back. So when you get into rotation and press, you're going to create some pretty good hip-shoulder separation, which is one of the things that was a pretty big issue with our guys that were falling out of range on horizontal shoulder abduction. So being able to gain momentum, fire a ball into a wall, well, for us it was into a wall, but carry the momentum, hold the ball behind, and then also be able to create some rotational power. Like this is a great drill for your guys to do when they're outside of their throwing season. In addition to letting their bodies organize themselves. Anytime you're moving something that's moving that fast, that's going to be an overspeed training of what you're going to do when you pitch, you're going to put your guys in a situation that they have to organize themselves to protect themselves when they land. So you're getting pelvic rotational velocity, trunk rotational velocity. You're also getting lead leg bracing when they have to land, which is a huge component to any good delivery. There's a bunch of different ways for you to train this and test this. This is just one of those ways that we found to be incredibly helpful. And in my coaching career, I've always thought these were great drills. And this study, I guess, I mean, this is not a scientific study that we're going to publish, but being able to run guys through a motion capture and test all of this stuff, we've determined that these things correlate and they work, which is outstanding. Turn and burn. So this is a back pedal into a shot put. So that's creating a ton of momentum backwards into rotation, into another shot put drill, also allowing them to load their front side as they turn, which is a huge component of having something firm to rotate against. This is Zach Jackson. Zach was a pitcher at Arkansas 4 or 5 years ago, good draft pick by the Blue Jays, and probably going to be a big leaguer in the next year or two. But what he was doing was working on a couple different things. When you're rotating backwards and going into a turn, you're working on direction to the plate, you're working on overspeed training that direction, you're also working on turning into a firm front side, driving through that front side and rotating your hips. So again, another drill that I thought was pretty good and had used for years, and then had been able to firm up that, hey, this is actually a drill that's going to produce higher segment velocities that we were looking for to help keep our delivery explosive. This is the actual thing that we tested for velocity. So this was the velocity test off the mound that also is a great drill. It's a fantastic drill. So this would be a mound shot put throw. So these were measured for distance, velocity, and from this mound we can actually get force. So distance, velocity, and force are the three things we measured off of these throws at Arkansas with our staff. And what we were able to find out is, like we kind of already talked about, the correlation between medicine ball velocity and thrown ball velocity are highly correlated. Again, this is another great drill. If you're not in a throwing cycle, you're getting components of your delivery. You're also getting explosiveness into the ground. You're getting lead leg bracing. You're getting backside activation. One of the other reasons why I think medicine balls are great off the mound is because you don't see guys really jump off of their backside to throw these. They're driving their foot straight into the ground, internally rotating, and firing out towards their target. One thing I have found that's been really successful with these, if you're going to use shot puts off the mound, is give them a target. Don't just say throw it as far as you can. Take a screen, take the plate, have them throw it to a partner. Obviously don't have your partner catch the ball because that's dangerous in itself. But give them something to throw the ball at. We did these years ago at Wake initially when I got there, and it had no target for our guys. Our guys were throwing them straight up in the air. They were throwing them off the ground. There was just no, there wasn't enough of a end game for them to try to knock something down. It's kind of the same purpose that you're using. If you're slamming something into a wall, it's really easy to see. I need to drive this thing into the wall. If you're throwing a med ball from the shot put from the mound, it gets a little bit more dicey. So this was a really another very good drill. You're also, things that we've seen with these over time is, one of the things as a pitching coach that we always struggle with is what to do with this guy that lifts and then kind of just falls himself open as he's going down the mound. What do we do with that guy? Like, how do we train that in the off season? What do we do? Do we just do a bunch of delivery work with, a towel or something along those lines? Or do we actually put something in his hands that's going to let him train ballistically? And that's the speed at which you're training. You want that speed to mimic the game or exceed the game if possible. You want it to be harder than what he has to do when he throws a pitch. So taking a lighter medicine ball, anywhere from 4 to 6 pounds, lifting and driving into the ground to try to create distance, what you'll see is if you video this and show them this next to their delivery, is you're going to see the center of the delivery stay together longer. You're going to see the back knee start to rotate inside of the ankle instead of hanging out over the toe and creating a push of direction, and that's going to leak energy from where you want to actually spend it. We want to spend all of our energy going forward from the mound. We don't want it going left and right. We don't want any lateral direction. So these things are great because you're holding something that's going to keep your shoulders behind your hips as they rotate, because you're holding an implement that weighs obviously a heck of a lot more than a baseball. And when you go to rotate, that's when everything will open up and you can drive something out towards a target. Mainly just keeping the delivery together a little bit longer and allowing you to fire something with your lower half. So from a training standpoint, I don't think you can beat this in the off season. And Lord knows, you want to maximize that time. We want to maximize our time with our guys. We want to make sure that they're doing something that is directly related to their delivery, directly related to pitching, and not just some boring drill, eyewash thing that we have guys do sometimes. We're all guilty of it. But that drill is fantastic. I love that drill. I think it's a game changer when you really start to get a guy to feel it, get a guy to feel himself doing something explosively. So, what to do with med balls? Overall, I like them during a non-throwing period more than I like them during a throwing period. We'll use them for some types of activation in our pre-throw. That's kind of how we would structure them. We would put them in there, during that portion instead of, having them do it post-throw or, I like them doing them in our pitching facility rather than in the weight room. It's just a little bit more, there's a little bit more crossover to what they're doing as a pitcher. Carrying a slightly heavier load off of the back hip allows them to rotate into their shoulder instead of trying to hold something in front, rotating it back. Scoop tosses have their place, but scoop tosses don't really create a whole lot of trunk and pelvic velocity, which is what we're trying to create, because that is obviously that's correlated to thrown ball velocity. The weight of the medicine ball is really, really important. I've screwed this up for years using 12, 15, 18-pound medicine balls and having guys try to do this stuff, which is a strength drill more than it is a pitching-related drill. You want your medicine balls to be in the 4 to 6 pound range. Like, stay in the 4 to 6 pound range with the med balls. It'll allow the guys to be a little bit more active with them. It will allow them to be able to throw them with velocity, and it's not going to lock them up when they're trying to make any kind of movement towards something explosive. You want to keep them moving explosively. As soon as you put something heavy in their hands, it slows down their movement. As soon as we overload them, their movement slows down. Nothing good can happen other than some kind of strength, some transient strength gains that they should be getting in the weight room anyway. Leave the heavier med balls for, overhead slams or something along those lines. Don't throw them off the mound. You want to keep it explosive, keep it moving, keep it moving in a pattern that would mimic their pitching as much as that's possible. So this is a video of one of the other drills we used, and this was test day in our motion capture lab. So, four things were tested. We tested slams over the landing leg, slams inside the landing leg. There it is again. And we also tested a windmill slam out over their head. So they would windmill slam to, like if a right-handed pitcher over there, to the back, kind of the back outside, or the front outside of their landing foot. And what we found with all of these drills is, again, they're all fantastic drills. We use them all in different doses, but the shot put velocity in terms of achieving higher levels of trunk and pelvic velocity was superior by far. Like, the numbers were not even close. And I'll show you guys kind of what a sample report looks like. Not a sample report, but one of the reports we actually went through, what that looks like and how we kind of figured out some of that information and got some things out of the report. But these drills are all in their own way totally fantastic and should be dosed out, as needed for individual pitchers. I'll go over kind of types of pitchers you'd be looking for to prescribe these drills at the end. So this is the motion capture report that we used to be able to tell us kind of what was going on. The important things to pay attention to on this report, because they're probably the easiest to see also, overall shoulder force and elbow valgus torque. So nothing's free when you're training pitchers. Like, nothing's free. There's a cost for training your pitchers. If you're going to train them ballistically and you're going to work them, there's a cost in there somewhere. And you're going to have to kind of find something that mitigates the danger of training a pitcher, because let's be honest, most of the pitchers that we deal with are going to be nicked up in some way, shape, or form if they pitch till they're 30 years old. So if we're going to train them in the offseason, let's make sure that we're not also going to be adding stress. So if you look at these reports, in terms of shoulder force, it falls well below the average of what would be considered high risk. These are all tapered lower than the actual risk factor is. So you'd have to go almost 2 deviations above where these black lines are to actually get into risk. So elbow valgus torque being at 4%, 4.5%, close to 5 there, you're not really at risk until it's about 7% of total valgus torque. You see that a lot with, the back end of a bullpen session. If we were going to run a motion capture and we were going to have a guy throw his bullpen, the back end of his session, you'd start to see valgus torque creep up slightly, and that would tell us, hey, here's where he kind of hits this wall. We actually did a little bit of that with some higher pitch counts just to kind of see what was going on inside their arms. The one that I think was the most showing and telling here was the shoulder force. You would assume that throwing a medicine ball in a shot put fashion would require some extra recruitment of those muscles and also probably be something that could be considered, a little bit outside the realm of safe. But what it showed us, and this was consistent among every one of the reports that we had, 12 guys throwing these things at high velocities, that was consistent with every report that it was on the very, very low end in terms of actual stress. So not only have we determined that these things do work in terms of what type of results we're trying to get, but that also, at least with the people that we tested, these things are safe. And you're not going to run into any extra ancillary issues in terms of adding too much stress based on a drill. Nobody wants to do that. So and we already kind of went through this. Basically what we did was we marked up the same 12 guys, ran through those drills that we just talked about, and went through, I think it ended up being 4 of each throw. The ones that ended up being by far superior to the others were the shot put. The shot put was by far superior. Workloads. Always don't just jump right into, we're going to throw this med ball shot put and we're going to throw it against the wall and it's going to be great and we're going to develop velocity that way. Get through a functional warm-up before you do anything. Absolutely make sure they're warmed up and primed to do this. Train both sides of the body. Start with scoops. Scoops are just basically working off the back hip and firing a medicine ball rotationally into that same wall. Train both sides of their body on this. Don't get into a situation where they're getting a ton of work on the left or right side of their body. We're already imbalanced as baseball players. There's no way around that, especially as pitchers. If you think about what that movement looks like, you're dealing with a bunch of rotational athletes that have crazy imbalances. So the last thing we want to do, especially in a time, again, this is mostly talking about what to do in the off season with your pitchers, a time when they're supposed to be regenerating and recovering, we don't want to put a crazy amount of workload on that same side that's getting 100, 110, 115 rotations in a given day on a game day setting. The other thing I will say about that is if you're going to dose out a bunch of the towel drill or whatever, whatever your favorite delivery drill is when they're not throwing, just make sure that you're monitoring how much you're using that. I'm not a huge fan of doing a bunch of shadow work off the mound that's aggressive. I think there's a place for it from the mental side of throwing a shadow inning, going through some things mentally. There certainly are some crossover benefits to that. Just make sure that when your pitchers are doing this, that's not something that's being done aggressively, because you're going to end up with unilateral deficiencies on their bodies that'll be even worse than they already are. There's nothing we're going to do to get symmetrical pitchers. There's nothing we're going to do to get symmetrical hitters, unless you got, switch hitters maybe. But there's really nothing you're going to do to make your guys symmetrical. If they are, their workload on the mound probably isn't high enough. So there's going to be some imbalances. You want to make sure you're lowering the risk of any type of extra imbalances by adding a bunch of high intent delivery work. Again, I feel like there's a time and a place for just about everything, but if you're having guys do a bunch of towel drills, I just feel like that's going to add load where it doesn't necessarily need to be. There's other ways that you can get the same result. Stay in the 4 to 6 rep range. This one is very important, I think. I think you get on the mound, you start throwing med balls, or you're throwing med balls against the wall. It's awesome. The music's playing. It's really loud. Guys are crashing these things into the walls at high velocity. It's cool. And all of a sudden, you've done 15 reps of a medicine ball drill, and your body's cashed. And then you move to the next one, and you're not getting the same, training economy that you would be getting if you stay within a regular range. I actually keep our guys in the 4 rep range. We usually don't go much above that. We feel like if we can get through 2 or 3 different drills, 4 to 6, mostly on the 4 side of the rep ranges, that we're going to get a lot of crossover and get a lot more bang for our buck that way. We don't necessarily want to get into 3 sets of 10 of a med ball scoop toss or a med ball shot put or anything along those lines. keep their bodies moving, get them going from drill to drill, keep what they're doing exciting to them, and don't have them coming in dreading doing it. Off season, obviously the volume's a little bit higher. We'll go through in-season rep ranges, 2 to 4 reps, get a feel, part of their pre-throw, mostly just the shot put, step behind that we showed earlier, and some of the turn and burns. We'll use those a little bit in season too, depending upon if we have a delivery issue that we need to address, and we feel like that could help them. If it's a directional issue, if it's a front side issue. If anybody was in for Coach Thompson's drill series earlier, the step behind front side drill is probably where I got an idea to do a med ball turn and burn from. And it's a fantastic drill. This has some of those same characteristics, although you get a little bit more bang for your buck with the throwing. Communicate with your strength coaches. This is insanely important because medicine ball work in the weight room is also incredibly prevalent, very popular. It's great, it's fantastic, but if you don't communicate and talk through what's going on with your strength coach or whomever is handling your players' strength and conditioning, if they're going to, another facility to train with a, strength and conditioning coach, and he's got his own med ball series, and you're going to have him come and do a med ball series, you're basically doubling up, and you don't want any of that when you're starting to train at these kind of high levels of intent. It's an age-appropriate drill. The one thing I would say is you probably don't want to do this with a 12-year-old. At those kind of intents and at those kind of rep ranges, introduce them. There's fine to throw them. They're not going to get themselves hurt as long as it's done within reason. But when you start getting to, 13, 14, 15, 16 years old, these things can become really, really valuable and also incredibly impactful on bringing them to a point where they're able to do something with a high level of intent that doesn't involve throwing a baseball, which is the name of the game when you're talking about developing during a shutdown period or a time when it's not as high, throwing economy as during the season. So, conclusions of the study, and then I'll get into some things about how to dose out some of these things from a delivery standpoint. The shot put, what we've already been over, it seems like 50 times, is by far the best one. It improved trunk and pelvic throwing velocity in 8 of the 12 pitchers. So it took another 4 pitchers to normal ranges or above normal ranges in the medicine ball throw. So it gave us something, positive feedback. Guys loved it, and it worked fantastic. Trunk velocity was improved with the windmill slam that I kind of demoed a little bit earlier, and on 6 of the 12, but it didn't really do anything for pelvic rotational velocity. Why is that important? Trunk rotational velocity in a vacuum is great. If your pelvis can't move to support it, your delivery's out of sync. You have plenty of top half rotation from kind of your ribs to the bottom of your pecs, but nothing to drive that up the chain if your pelvis isn't rotating and helping your trunk move. It'll screw up the chain of your delivery, basically. So that drill for a kinetic chain movement pattern isn't necessarily as good as a pelvic or a medicine ball push, shot put, or whatever you want to call it. It's a fine drill. There's place for it. If you have a guy that already is exhibiting what you think is pretty good pelvic rotational velocity and his lower half spinning correctly, he's got good control, he passes whatever screening you guys have for internal, external hip rotation, that might be a great guy to dose out a windmill slam to or add that to his training protocols and progressions. The lowest rotational velocities of any of the drills are the bracing drills. The bracing drills are the ones where we're starting and slamming over the leg, inside the foot, and out in front of the mound, which is like a 4 to 6 foot throw, basically kind of down angle into the ground. So the legs, the slams that work on bracing are awesome drills. So if you have a guy that's landing kind of cockeyed or crooked or traveling through his landing position, so if you see and you're watching video of your guy or you're just watching him pitch and you get to this position, starts to rotate through, and the knee just kind of starts traveling, you're just leaving velocity on the table. And also getting your guy in a situation where he's more apt to, be open to different types of injuries, elbow, shoulder, lat. If you can get him to a position when he hits the ground and rotates around his lead leg, that's ideal. There's not too much wobble and movement of that knee. So if you're working on, what do I do with this if I'm trying to train this and work on it in the off season, the rotational bracing slams are fantastic. You can do them split leg, just like you do a normal rocker drill, where you load up on the backside and then drive over, so he can kind of feel what it's like to their foot straight into the ground and drive through their finish. You can also go with the full delivery into the brace and then slam the ball over the foot to get some rotational component and a little bit of trunk rotation in there too. You could add the windmill slam. You could also add just a slam inside the foot to work on keeping in a good directional path for them when they're throwing. So the main thing to look at if you're going to start dosing out anything slammed over the leg on the mound is what's happening at the lead knee. Is there wobble? Is there traction forward? You want to eliminate and have enough stability in there so that when you get back to throwing a baseball, that has already been patterned. And that's a second nature thing for them at that point, and there is really, really good crossover between your drill series and what they're going to try to do from a throwing standpoint. Just overall training economy, you want to change the drills up probably every 2 or 3 weeks. You don't necessarily want to have them do something. Our guys went a little bit longer based on the fact that we were testing something. But you want to chop those up every 2-3 weeks, every 4 weeks. 4 weeks is probably about the limit you'd want to use them, then reintroduce them throughout the season. So slowly kind of reintroduce them to their pre-throw. Also in their training in the weight room, you can kind of reintroduce some of those things. So sorry for all the sciencey stuff, but hopefully everybody got something out of that, and thank you for your time.